David Berry is our speaker this morning. We're so fortunate to have him with us. David goes way back with the fellowship, 1974, I think. He worked with Paul Solomon. He was part of the mystery schools here in Virginia Beach and in Carmel in the Valley. He's been an inner light teacher, inner light consciousness teacher and guide for a very long time, and has taught here and in Europe. He has graced the lives of many, many special ed children. I'm sure saved many of their lives, and has graduate degrees in psychology and child development. He gives Akashic readings as he was taught to do by Paul, and teaches the tools and the insights he has learned from the schools over the year. We're very fortunate to have him with us briefly. He'll be here until January 2nd, and he'll be giving readings for those who are interested in signing up for one. In the meantime, let's give a big welcome to David Berry.
Well, I am so glad to be here. And since I've been away so long, it's been since May, I'm naturally fighting these feelings that I should give you all the family news, but I'm going to spare you that, except to say that all is well, unimaginably well. Things are really good. And I will tell you that about a week ago, when I entered into meditation, saying, in my innocence, gosh, what does the fellowship need to hear? For me. Yes, I am that conceited. I thought I might have something you needed to hear. And then what I got really distressed me, because I was asked to address conflict. I don't want to address conflict. I want to address peace. So I'll make some passing references to conflict, and we'll talk about peace. I was also prompted to take a look at a book I haven't looked at since 1976, and didn't I have a hard time finding it? It was called The Origins of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by a man named Julian James. And I see the nod of recognition here. It was about the two hemispheres of the mind that we just talked about in Paul's reading. So I read that book, and it was heavy sledding, honestly. And I came to the fellowship within a year, and here was Paul talking about it in 1977. Talking about it with such understanding then, that I really only come to understand it now, 40 years later. That's the truth. He talked about it as the great attainment for a human. The melding of the two halves of the brain, the two voices that argue with each other. One being the voice of rational, sequential thought. All too familiar with tradition, teachings, logic, and the intuitive mind. A little bit formless and always surprising, and kind of hard to put into operation in the world as we have it, both of those things, and how necessary it is to bring them together so that they work as a seamless whole. Well, I confess I didn't read all 456 pages, but I did read the first chapter again. And thought about it in terms of conflict. Now, I was guided to think about one more thing. And this is easy to talk about, because every week here we sing the great invocation. Well, I did read Alice Bailey years ago, and thank God I've forgotten most of it, because there's a lot of it. And it's heavy sledding, too. But I didn't really know what prompted her to create this invocation. Nor did I know, except in the most general way, her life story. But it's worth looking at for 1 minute. She was a theosophist. She did know Ledbetter and Annie Besant and H.P. Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner, whom we just heard from. She was an aristocrat in England. She made her way to the United States, edited the Theosophical magazine, rose high in the ranks, and in 1937 published The Great Invocation, meant to be a prayer for all mankind, and it has become that. It's used in 70 languages, and who knows in how many kinds of sanctuaries, in how many kinds of services, religious and non-religious. She wrote it in 1937, and she introduced it in 1937. Introduced it to the United States, which honestly in 1937 had no idea it would soon be plunged into the greatest war the world has ever known. She found herself plunged into a war with other theosophists when she published this prayer, this song. They said, "Oh, that's not genuine. You're not really channeling the masters, because that material doesn't look like my material." And she took grief for the rest of her life from other theosophists for it. Now, you would think that that kind of controversy would have faded over the 70 or 80 years. I'm not going to do the math since it was introduced. But I gather that when this fellowship took a look at changing a few of the words a couple of years ago, the controversy is still with us. And there were some bad feelings. Well, it's just words we were arguing over. Now, I heard Paul say this about 1,000 times. If there's something in front of you that needs to be done, and it's practical, and you're in conflict, then you're not fighting over what's in front of you. You're hauling out your ego and your desires and your willingness to dominate another and even up old scores. Because there's no reason to fight over anything that needs to be done. Well, of course, he always said these things at a time when everybody was fighting. And there were fights and disagreements, and we called it the mystery school. It was supposed to be part of the package. Well, it's not. And the mystery school is really what I want to talk about. Yes, we disagree with each other, and we disagree for reasons egotistical entirely. Budgets, schedules, programming, who's to do what, and who's to be responsible, just aren't matters to fight about. There aren't enough of us. All right, can't waste the energy. Yet we find ways to argue with each other and to undermine and drag down and gossip. Here we are at a time of the year which is a very quiet time of the year. We're just starting on a new year after the 22nd of December. The planets are a little peaceful. And it's a time to make a resolution. I'm going to use a phrase familiar to you all, that we will honor in our hearts for the year to come. And I'm going to ask you to make the oldest resolution in the world. Love each other. Don't argue. I'm very sure there are no decisions in front of us as a fellowship that need fighting over. Now, I don't know that that's what I was asked to attend to. Not everything gets explained to me. That would be an understatement. How do we do that? When sharp words are exchanged, when tension rises in the room. Oh, when all judgments and failings come to mind, then that's the moment when we take that big breath and let it out. And pray for that person that we're in the way with, that we're judging, opposing, questioning, in that very moment. And then we go home and in our own prayer chambers, our own temples, our own groves on top of the mountain. We do it again, knowing that God is listening. And he and she do not approve of our petty squabbles. They get mightily in the way. In the way of what, folks? Running a church? Gosh, this is a church. It's a wonderful church. It's not a very big church. It's had an influence on mankind all out of proportion to its size. You've heard that from me before. A look at the roster of the people who have spoken here will convince you that that is true. I wish we had a roster of the people whose lives have been changed by what they heard sitting here. That would be a long roster. And it's a private experience. It rarely finds words. And it's the most important thing we do. And when we walk into this sanctuary, tense, in conflict, that is hindered. It isn't blocked. God's more clever than we are. But it's hindered. Let's not do that. There aren't very many of us here today, but there are enough of us that if each and every one of us said, I will not feed the fires in the year to come, no matter what, even if my ox is gored. What a difference that would make. That's what I'm going to ask you to do in a minute. I'm going to ask you to make that resolution and that promise to you, brothers and sisters. I don't know what conflict is coming. I don't know if Alice Bailey understood that World War II was coming. I think back home in Britain they did, but in America in 1937? I don't think so. Maybe with Hitler, but Japan? Who's thinking about Japan? Nobody. I don't know what conflicts may be coming for this fellowship. I have never followed the deliberations of our board. I confess, I've never read the Constitution of this fellowship. I'm very sure that the proceedings of the board and the Constitution are like poker chips and game rules compared to the real job, which is to come together and stay together, even when the money runs out. Even when the work is not exciting, when we're not planning a family gathering, but just trying to pay the utility bills. It's in those quiet moments that people feel free to let some of that bile out. And even old scores, let's not do that. Let's agree, let's pledge not to do that. If everybody in this room sows peace for the year to come, I really know that it will make a difference here. It will make a big difference. We can't know which of our visitors or which of us may in a year or 2 or 5 suddenly be in a position to lead, influence, heal many. I'm thinking back now, yes, I am this old, to our children and grandchildren whom I knew as toddlers in the fellowship congregation. Some of them are doing wonderful things and great things in the world. They don't always report back to us, but they are out there. I will share one little tidbit. I can't ever seem to speak to this group without sharing this. I have told you the story of Simeon, who was reading, whose life was saved by Paul's reading when he was an infant, and who had told me in a dream 8 months before he was born that he'd be born by cesarean section with no bleeding on the 28th of August, and threw in the interesting detail that he would be a poet. I kind of forgot that last part. There was a lot of drama around the other parts. The years went by and he became a poet, and he published many poems in poetry magazines, which are exclusively read by other poets. More than 100 such poems. Last September 2013, he won the National Book Award. And his book, first book of poetry called Ampersand Revisited, is coming out this spring. And in September of 2014, he won it for the second time. The first time anybody ever won it, twice in a row, and that book is coming out in September. And that has caused me to do a number of things, to look very closely, again, at what he writes, which is not easy for me to understand, and also look at who's reading it. Simeon's 41 now. 41 years of working out on that dream, folks. 41 years. How many years in the working out of this fellowship? From 74 to now? Somebody do the math. Is that 40? 72. Okay, 1972. You don't see me struggle here. 28 and 10 is 38 and 4.
43.
Thank you. Thank you, George. We haven't worked it all out yet. We're still unfolding. I've looked at the people who are responding to Simeon's poems. He's doing a lot of readings now, mostly in the Boston area. Gosh, they're 18 and 19 and 20. They haven't read the books you and I have read. They haven't listened to the music you and I haven't listened to. But they're hearing something in his poems that speaks to them. I didn't see that coming. He didn't see that coming either. He thought he was writing for his contemporaries. Nope. He's writing for teenagers. Has been for 20 years. Writing for the people who are teenagers now. Well, we're writing for the people who are children and teenagers now. In this fellowship, we don't know yet how it all is going to unfold. We don't know yet who all will be touched. We have a huge ripple coming out from this little building. And what are we to that? Well, we are the parents and the grandparents of those children. We also are the stewards of that light on earth. It fills this sanctuary. We feel it. We are nourished by it. We are from time to time straightened out by it. I think everybody I can see here, whom I know, loves it. Do we appreciate it? I'm not sure we're able to see it as large as it really is. Last May I did a reading for a person who has been taking a boat off of Bimini for the last 15 years and leading people as they swam with dolphins. Lovely lady. And about to leave that operation and start an operation of her own, a consciousness training operation built around the Kabbalah and a tetrad. I was amazed to find myself entertaining a guest. And I'll go ahead and use that name. It's a familiar name in this sanctuary. It was Dion Fortune. She was important to this fellowship and important to Paul. Still is. When I tasted Dion Fortune in the 1970s, I didn't like what I tasted. But oh my, that's not what she's like. She isn't about black robes, paper mache moons, and silver stars on your robe. At all. And she said, I never really looked like that. That was my working costume for England in the 1920s and the 1930s. What am I really working on now? The highest technologies, the most advanced. Do you think you know where we're going with all this digital and cyber innovation? No, it's in its infancy, and I am in the middle of it. That is Dion Fortune, not David Barry. I was astonished. I don't know Dion Fortune. Yes, I've glimpsed Paul Solomon many times in the course of these readings. He's very different. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details because I'm not going to make any claims or anything that can be taken as a brag. Just as he did when he was on this earth and with us, almost every time he opens his mouth, he surprises me. He did that too, of course. I'll just mention one. I had never heard a Christian minister speak about self-love until I heard Paul Solomon speak about it. It's not an Episcopal idea, folks. It just isn't. It was one of the very most important things he taught. Sometimes he said it was the most important thing that he taught. Now, I have my own understanding of it now. If I enter into the temple, enter into temple consciousness and meditation, and I have not spent the time and the energy to love myself first, then I'm walking into Carnegie Hall deaf. I must love myself first to receive what will be given to me there. I need to love myself and get me and my hang-ups out of the way. It's about loving yourself. It's not about dealing with all your mistakes and deficiencies. No, it's actually about loving yourself. That's what the mystery school is actually about. The mystery school is not about meeting your deficiencies. Well, yes it is, but that's at street level. The mystery school is about loving yourself. Loving yourself when you are across the table from someone and you all have a decision to make. If you're loving yourself in that situation, you will not argue. You will not fight for your point of view. The need won't be there. You'll be secure enough to sense what really needs to be done and be a voice for that. And nothing in the decision to be made will threaten you. Nothing in the comportment of that other person will irritate you. And you will not disqualify yourself in any degree when you speak. That's my language. Paul used other, better language. Did he himself always live up to that ideal? Of course he did not. I don't either. None of us does. Alice Bailey and Rudolf Steiner and Annie Besant on occasion fought like cats and dogs. That's over now. And wouldn't it be wonderful if all that gossip disappeared? It really would. We don't have much gossip about Jesus. 2,000 years have passed, and the various fathers of the church have scrubbed away all the gossip, and that's good. That's good. We just might hear the good. We might think something was in the way if we knew more gossip than we know. I'd like to scrub some gossip here myself. We have a past, don't we? I'm looking at them and I see half a dozen people I've got 45 years of past with. I don't remember those conflicts anymore. I barely remember what caused me to leave the fellowship. Christmas, 1979. I barely remember it. I certainly don't get excited by it anymore. And I think now, when I listen to one of Paul's recordings, or I read the wonderful books that have been put together by the people who got past their own issues, like Grace and Daniel Emmanuel, I'm just grateful that I got to be a part of it. Hear those words. Be in that energy. So it's not that I've forgiven him for his deficiencies. I've kind of forgotten them. It comes with age, I guess. And I hope that my children will do the same for me when it's their turn. The Great Invocation, I can't read that from here, I can't even read the clock from here. The purpose which the masters know and serve. Well, the ancient wisdom opens the door to that purpose for us. But it isn't ancient. It's brand new. It's still coming. It's being born every day. It's as new as the cyber revolution. It's as new, I won't use the term the New World Order because it's not too orderly, is it? But there's a new shape to the world. And God knows there are strifes and conflicts and horrible wars. And we all feel the same about those. We wish they were over. Ardently, I will preach to the choir. We also mustn't let them discourage us. They have always been there. We all believe they won't always be there. But we can't focus on them. We can't avoid it sometimes when the news grabs us and we cry a little. But we mustn't focus on them. We must focus on what is new and becoming and being given. Our children do. It's not news to you that most children don't care much for history. That's the way it should be. They want to know where they are going to go and what they are going to do. And how do they get that? From our beings. Not from our words or our experience. From our beings. When I left the fellowship in 1980, and I had to make a new life, I saw myself as lost and defeated. That was untrue. I looked around and I said, I want to work with children. And I want to work with children who need me, and I thought that was a street level decision. So I earned those degrees magically and quickly, yes. Now, I won't tell that story now, but goodness, it happened fast. And I worked for 30 years. It was special ed kids. Thinking I was taking care of business the way the grocer and the street cleaner and the attorney take care of business. And then a few years ago, I finished with that work. I didn't retire, by the way. I was fired for being over 60. It's not an unusual story these days. And then a couple of years ago, as I was following in the news how another one of my special students had gotten 40 years in prison for a crime he did commit, I was in prayer for him and in meditation. And in the vision that followed, I saw two things. I saw the dream I had the night before I taught my very first ILC workshop in 1977, where I saw a barge covered with children rise out of the sea, and they were German orphans. That's all I knew about them. They sang to me, and I could not distinguish their words, and they went back beneath the sea. Later, I learned that in my most recent life, I had been a Luftwaffe pilot in the early months of World War II. A very lucky pilot. His plane crashed and burned a few weeks before the invasion of Russia, and the war was over for him. And as the years went by, I learned more about him. He had been quite poor. He had been a lot like the kids I served in special ed. Lived in a slum on the north side of Berlin. Was given a chance to rise by the Hitler Youth. Took that chance and became a pilot. A very lucky outcome for a poor boy in the 30s in Germany. And he became a leader, and he led many others into the Hebrew youth. He died early in the war, but most of them didn't. Most of them went out with the army, did terrible things as the German army marched through Russia. It's a terrible story. And then died in the snow in the siege of Stalingrad, slowly and hard. Gosh, that's who the German orphans were on that barge. Gosh, guess who those special ed children were? I didn't know it at the time. I loved them, as all children, as all teachers love their children. I didn't realize when I sat down alone with a kid and we connected. I always knew I was not alone, but I didn't realize there were 10, 20, 40 other children in the room, listening and learning. What were they learning? To put it in the largest terms, you can trust a government. There are governments that do good as public schools do good. But you can trust a culture that their betrayal by Nazi Germany was an anomaly in this world. That's what they learned. I had no idea I was part of that effort. But yeah, I've had some influence in this life, although it really only is numbered in a few hundred children, and I've had some influence on that other life, on those other planets, where they were watching closely and learning, hand over fist, not from me, but from those handicapped children who were ensouled by those same children. That gave a new meaning to that career for me. It gave me some peace. It made me see that leading the fellowship was not a failure. Yeah, I really did want to go on teaching in Europe. I really did want to return to Findorn and hear those people applauding in that silly way that they do. I didn't get to do that. I did something better. The mystery school moved me out into the street, and I had to cope again at street level. And wasn't it great? It really was. That's the mystery school. It has gifts to give you. You cannot see. You certainly can't foresee them. If I had foreseen what I just described to you, I would have messed it up. It was necessary for me to learn the tools of psychology like any other grad student and use them as I had been trained to use them, which I did. What I did in my private time and in my prayers, that's not so easy either. But yeah, I was a school psychologist who did what he was trained to do, as he was trained to do it. And in the end, got a great gift, peace of mind from that work. A job well done, he said boastfully. You're in a mystery school. You're going to look back one day and see a job well done. Probably don't know you're doing it. At the moment, you do it. I do know this. From time to time, I had my issues with the people who were administrators in the schools. Because I wanted to stay there, I mostly swallowed them. I knew a better way. I wasn't being listened to, of course. And so I got to stay. I'm not going to ask you to swallow your conflicts. We have a better way in this fellowship. I'm going to ask you to reconcile yourselves one with another in the moment that the conflict rears its head. And you too will have that 45, 50-year payoff to the work you've done in this mystery school, the one you can't see now. I don't know what's going to become of those children who are out there with Burmese in the backyard. Wonderful things. I don't know what's going to become of your children and grandchildren. They may never enter this sanctuary. But when you hold one in your arms, you transmit whole what you practice here. Wordlessly, concept-free, and young children absorb those gifts exactly as they are given. Please believe me. My children have grown up to be far better people than I ever envisioned. Far better people than I deserved, given my parenting skills. Everyone here can understand that, can't you? That's not mysterious. Well, that's part of the mystery school, too. Every time you take an infant in your arms, you transmit what you practice here. Be sure you transmit the best, not the argument, not the silly stuff, not the drama, as we say. Let's let that go. Let's let some new wave of younger souls come in here and make their own drama. I see that most of us are reasonably mature. Let's practice that and let the young people make their own drama. Is that a deal? I hope so. Now, of course, I'm going to ask you to spend a few moments in the silence. And of course, I've talked too long, as I always do, but one more time, close your eyes. I'm not going to ask you to look 40 years ahead. We can't handle it. Look 1 year ahead. Make a prayer right now that you will be aided to spread light and harmony in the most simple, street-level sense in your year in this fellowship that lies ahead. That does mean no gossip. That does mean no taking sides. That does mean not taking seriously what conflicts emerge. Loving the people involved and not saying yes when they rant. See yourself doing that. We're not administering the national budget here. We're paying utility bills. It's not a big deal. Of course, we should all help do that, but that's not a big deal either. Let's do it in harmony. That's the big deal. The reward will be unimaginable. Take a few minutes now and see yourself in this building, spreading harmony. Loving those, even those you not only don't agree with, you may not actually like. You can love people you don't like. Special education will teach you that. And practice now in the silence. Putting it on the altar, it's a little quaint now, I don't hear it much anymore. When we used to approach the altar in the temple, we used to take our little conflicts and put them on the altar and see them transformed into nuggets of gold. And when we left the temple, that gold was added to our energy, our aura. I used to think that was quaint. No. It's real. See that happening. Did a reading a while back for someone who wanted to relocate to the Steiner community in Pound Ridge, New York. And in the reading it was said of them, they have had 80 years to lay down their differences and become brothers and sisters. And recently they have succeeded. Let's do that too. Some of us may still be here 80 years after this fellowship was founded. That stuff happens these days. So make that prayer and mean it and expect to be assisted. And now with your energy, just with your energy, reach out and touch one another. The first advanced I will see, I think it was 78, we were at the Hilton in Virginia Beach, and we sat in a big circle and meditated. I don't know, 60 or 70 people. We'd been together for a week or more. And there was a man named Don from Alaska. And this meditation ended, we were blissful, happy, at peace. And he cried out, "We ought to get together more often than every 1,000 years or so." He broke up the place. I have remembered it all these years because he was exactly right. This gathering is your 1,000-year opportunity. Don't blow it over budget. Okay? Thank you.